Next hour, I'm going to play clips from two different Obama speeches. One at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where he was extremely arrogant and made jokes about the private banking takeover of the United States. And another where he demonized the Tea Party folks who have been bipartisan, but the Republicans are trying to take it over with the Tea Party Express, and said that basically you don't criticize the government in America because the government is the people. No, it's not. It's foreign offshore banks. The same people that own Barack Obama owned George W. Bush. Now, the reason I got this fellow on is because he's written multiple books and made films on the subject. He's worked for ABC News, the BBC, the list goes on and on. Palast stories bite. They're so relevant, they threaten to alter history. Palast is exactly what a journalist is supposed to be, a truth hound, doggedly independent, undaunted by power. And remember, a few years ago, they issued a Homeland Security arrest warrant for him. That was on ABC News because he went and videotaped FEMA camps where they were holding the people from Katrina right next to a chemical plant that was belching toxic waste onto them. And they said, that's global infrastructure. Under the Patriot Act, arrest him. But it blew up in their face. So, I mean, they've actually come after Greg Palast. But the main reason I got Greg Palast on today is because back in 2002, Greg Palast got IMF World Bank documents. And he came on my show and talked about them, but he reported on it at the BBC, where the IMF and others engineer the collapse of societies, get them on debt on purpose. You know, this predates, the information with economic hitmen and John Perkins. And it showed the predatory nature, how they create riots on purpose, how they jack up prices. And now they're doing the same thing to the United States. And I have the Washington Post where the head of the IMF last week said, the good times are over. That's a quote. Everything's going to go to the bankers. And in Greece, I heard him on CNN yesterday. I have the Times of London. They were framing the Greeks as bad people. They get 85% on average for their pensions they pay into through the government. You know, the Germans only get 45%. The Germans are mad. So they're phrasing it as kind of like the housing bubble. Oh, it's the people that got the loans that are bad. And then right the day after the banker bailout bill, they said, oh, we're not going to spend it on the banking bailout now. We're not going to tell you where it went. So it's the same thing here. They're saying, oh, the Greeks deserve this. Kind of like Iceland. Oh, they deserve it. Well, Iceland said no. Now the documents have come out. The Icelanders owed nothing. It was all the banks. It was all their debt. So Greg Palast has been on this like no one else. I mean, we heard it from him first. He diagrammed exactly what was being set up in the West, and he joins us now. Greg, good to have you with us.
Glad to be back with you, Alec.
So much is going on. Break down your take on what's currently happening and where you see it going.
Well, I think that you've got to be pretty darn correct. I mean, number one, again, you'll see, just like they blame homeowners in America for subprime loans, predatory loans. You have to understand that we have a massive foreclosure problem in the United States. 2 million families facing foreclosure, which is more than we had when Obama took office and said he was going to fix it. He was going to put a moratorium on foreclosure. He didn't do either of those things. And there's more people in foreclosure than ever. When that happens, the entire housing market remains in collapse. And they blame the victims of predatory lending. That's very important. That it's a system blaming the victims. In the case of Greece, they're blaming the people of Greece. How dare they want to collect their Social Security when they've been manipulated by the bankers because they're tied to the damn euro. Now, I've actually spoken to the father of the euro, the guy that came up with it, Robert Mundell. He was the economist. He's the guy who came up with, by the way, he's also, his other invention besides the euro is supply-side economics, the kind of voodoo economics where, if you cut taxes, the tax revenue goes up. So he even told me that the euro, the creation of the euro, was all about not creating a strong Europe, but it was, because he's not European, he's Canadian-American. It was about making sure that each nation would no longer have control of its own fiscal fate, that they would be stuck competing against each other by reducing services and provided by the government, so that you keep cheapening your workforce. And he was very blunt about it. He said that's the purpose of it. It's not to make Europe stronger. It's to make the nations within Europe impotent. And that was his philosophy. So.
And that's the same thing with NAFTA and GATT. Ross Perot was right. The race to the bottom, and we got the SPP, North American Union documents 3 years ago when Judicial Watch sued and got them. And they said they had all these corporate chiefs there at the governmental meeting telling the Secretary of State of Mexico, Canada, and the United States what to do. And they said, we're going to lower the U.S. and Canada to the level of Mexico, just as we've done with the euro, so there's nowhere to run, nowhere to compete, and now we're going to play nations off against each other all over the world, Asia, European Union, North American Union, to basically get all the tax money for bankers as bailouts and take people's pension funds. And now we see Bloomberg reporting that federal regulators are preparing to take at least half of people's pensions in the U.S.
Well, I think that what we're seeing, too, is that, when Obama and Bush came up with the bailout, what they didn't do is what China did. And China, they just said, if we're going to give money to the bank, they've got to re-lend the money. Remember that Obama made a claim that he saved the financial system. No, he didn't. He saved the financiers, and he doesn't seem to understand there's a difference between financiers who were bailed out and the financial system. Try to get a loan today. Try to get a mortgage today. You can't. If you're a small business, you can't borrow money today. It's impossible. No one will give you money. There is no credit in the system. That's why we're on our knees, and that's why there is officially still nearly 10% unemployment. Forget the unofficial numbers. And because Obama never saved the financial system whatsoever. They kept them. What you have to have is capital in a capitalist system. And the money went to the banks and never came out. They swallowed it, and it was gone in bonuses and building up their own capital base. That's the big problem. So whereas China grew 8% last year because they doubled the amount of credit in their economy, and so that people could buy up all the junk that they were going to sell us at Walmart, the Chinese bought it for themselves because they're, the banks, and they're the bankers. If they don't give out the money, they execute them, which is a pretty good system of regulation, in my opinion. Some way disagree. But, we've pulled cash out of our economy. We've not saved the financial system. We've saved the financiers, and that's a very big difference.
Let me boil that down and see if you agree. Paulson goes in and threatens martial law. I've had the congressman on who witnessed it. He says, there'll be blood in the streets. That's a quote. Everything will collapse if you don't give us access to trillions of dollars in a blank check. October 3rd, it passes. But before that, they wouldn't pass it, so they had the bank heads go out and badmouth the stock market. It went down by a record level. The Congress panicked, passed it, and then October 4th, on that Saturday, Paulson says, we're not going to spend it to unfreeze mortgages. We're not going to tell you where it went. So they had blamed the victims and said it was these people's fault. And I guess in a way it was. They got suckered, but that was only a part of the derivative scheme. And then the money disappeared, and a year and a half later, both administrations, they won't say where the money went. We know they're flush with trillions of dollars of cash. They're lending less money. They've frozen Main Street, destroying Main Street so they can come back in and buy it up. The same Goldman Sachs people went in and engineered the derivative system. They sold derivatives to Iceland. Now Greece is going under, and they're coming and getting $146 billion from Europe and the U.S. to go pay Goldman Sachs, and Greece will still be in the same situation they were, except now they're ordering Greece to give them at least half their pension fund money.
Yeah, and, what's also happened, remember that the Federal Reserve has bought $1.25 trillion, let me say it again, $1.25 trillion of mortgage-backed securities. This is gambles on mortgages. Now, we have 2 million people in foreclosure. That $1.25 trillion, instead of going to the banks to guarantee their best on these subprime mortgages, could have actually gone to have bought the mortgages from people at a discount to the banks. That's what Roosevelt did. Roosevelt set up in 33 the Federal Home Loan Bank, and he ordered the banks to turn over their mortgages, the Federal Home Loan Bank. The mortgages are reset at a reasonable level. The banks were given, whether they liked it or not, government bonds. Because the mortgage payments were drastically lowered on people because it was not the usurious rates like we have now in subprime, people were able to pay it back. The housing market rose, and the government actually made billions of dollars on that transaction. But so instead of taking the $1.25 trillion and helping people in trouble with mortgages because they were given these crazy mortgages with 14% interest rates, and knocking it down to reasonable interest rates, instead of doing that, we paid the bankers $1.25 trillion and took the gamble off their hands. People are still losing their homes.
Okay, when Bloomberg talks about $23.7 trillion 6 months ago and now $28 trillion, that's other ways, I guess, monetizing debt and things that the Federal Reserve has done. But from the numbers I saw, when it got up to $15 trillion, this was mainstream news last year, that would have paid off all of the mortgages in the country, from penthouses down to apartments. That would have paid off all the mortgages and then some.